Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today titled Why Every Board Needs a Solid Connection with Their CEO. My name's Sean McDonald, and I'll be your moderator for the next 45 minutes. Firstly, thanks for attending today. We really appreciate the effort you've made to be here. And during our session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering these during our session and try to get through as many of your questions as we have time for. And finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, as is customary for our webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering our 1-minute survey at the end, you'll go into our draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those who have not met Board Pro, we are a board software provider that serve over 20,000 users around the world. We enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively, with clever software, with less time, and deliver more impact and value for their organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. So for today, sit back, take in as much information as you can. Everything you see here will be sent to you, including a copy of the recording of the webinar, a copy of the presentation that Lisa will be taking us through, and the topic white paper authored by Lisa Cook of Get On Board Australia. So above all, ask questions of our panelists using the question button at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer these as we go. So let me now introduce our presenter and panelists for today. Brett Hergt is the co-founder and CEO here at Board Pro. Brett is a serial entrepreneur, having built several high-growth businesses over the last 20 years. Brett brings tenacity, a strategic mindset, strong business generalist skills, and an enduring curiosity to the table. Kia ora to you, Brett. Lisa Cook, who is our presenter today, is the founder and managing director of Get On Board Australia, supporting aspiring new and existing board members and boards to thrive. She has 13 years of experience serving on boards from a range of organisations in the private, public and not-for-profit sectors in Adelaide, Sydney and across Australia, including Shooting Australia, Inclusive Sports South Australia, West Beach Community Bendigo Bank and Australian College of Professionals. Kia ora to you, Lisa.
Kia ora and g'day.
Excellent. Giselle McLaughlin is our governance specialist that works alongside us here in the team and has an eye on the strategic horizon as well as on the ground just ahead. Giselle is all about down-to-earth governance and business advice and thrives on building sustainable businesses alongside healthy leaders and lives. Kia ora to you, Giselle. So I will now hand over to Lisa to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for that great introduction. And hello, everyone. And I would love to start out by, let's consider the question that we're answering today. Why every board needs a solid connection with their CEO would actually make for a very short webinar, because there are two answers to that. Because it's going to make your job as a board member a ton easier, and it's actually going to make your life and job as a board member enjoyable. But that's not a great webinar. That's not delivering the right value. So we're more so going to focus on how do we make sure we get this relationship, this dynamic right and optimal and thriving. And to do that, we're going to touch on 4 things today. Really, we want to understand who the CEO is and what their relationship is to the board. Now, this may seem very straightforward, but many boards and board members that I've worked with haven't actually taken the time and don't do so on a regular basis to really answer this question. What does it mean for the CEO and the board in this organization at this time? And what is that relationship? Who are they? What are they meant to be doing? How does this work? And then from that, we're going to understand what the board's role is and how it impacts the CEO's role. Really, how does that dynamic work? What is the board's responsibility when it comes to the CEO? Then we're going to start looking at where this relationship can go wrong. And we'll take 2 perspectives. We're going to look at from the board and from the CEO perspective. Then we're going to help you out. Here are some things, 7 things that every board can do to have a great working relationship with their CEO. And that's what we're going to do today in our very short time together.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. Now, I have 4 questions that have come in straight away. So let me pose those to you.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Does the CEO get a vote at board meetings?
This really depends on the CEO. So if your CEO is a pure CEO, so let's think about someone who's been employed by the organization, they're not a director, they don't hold another role, they're not a board member, generally they won't get a vote at the board meeting. They will have influence, they may have impact, but generally they won't have a vote, unless, of course, they are someone like a managing director, a managing partner, or any other role that is directly related with being a director of the company. They may get a vote. Likely they will. There may be some things that they don't get a vote on. For example, their remuneration, their salary package. Chances are they won't get a vote on that. But really, that then clarifies the importance of the board really establishing those parameters and how that works, particularly if it is a director who's a managing director.
And based on your experience with Get On Board Australia, how long does it take generally to recruit a CEO?
It can take some time. So you want to give yourself enough time as a board to get it right. And I always fall back on this adage, hire slow, fire quickly. And if you think about the whole recruitment process when it comes to a CEO, really starts with the board knowing and articulating and understanding what they need from this CEO role at this point in time for the next 3, 5, 6 years. Generally, you're going CEO tenure around 6 years. So what do you want? What do you need? What does the organization need from that CEO role position over that point in time? Write it down, get a really clear profile of the CEO. Then you can start going out to market or search internally. Do you have people that would fit this criteria that you've developed? And then you can search from within the organization. So that process in itself, where you're writing the profile and really trying to be clear on what you need, and then planning how your recruitment process will work, could take a month. So there's a month already gone. This is why it helps to have this plan entered before you actually need to use it, and constantly updating it so that it's ready to go when you need it.
The next
so there's a month already. Could be 3, could be 6 months.
As long as that, 6 months. Wow.
Yeah, to get it right.
How can you tell if the CEO is providing false or sanitized information, Lisa?
If you're not getting bad news and everything seems rosy and fine, that's probably a clear indication. But I feel like most of the time it's a little more nuanced than that. You want to look at language. You want to look at what is the kind of information, be really attuned to it. That's why time on a board can be really valuable, because you start to pick up these kind of things. You look at the body language of the CEO or of the person who's delivering an update or answering your questions based on the information that they've given to the board in preparation for the meeting. And just being really aware and astute of these things. You're also looking at other reports and documentation, and are the dots connecting? Is everything presenting the same way? If not, you might want to do a bit of probing, ask for some more information, really just to check all the points on something to make sure everything's marrying together and that makes sense. At the end of the day, how is the organization performing in a financial sense? Usually does give you an indication that everything inside is generally going well. It doesn't directly translate, but it's a good indication. But look at the whole picture. Body language, information, how it's written, what's there, what's not there is usually very telling as well.
And one final question from Paul, who asks, who creates the CEO's KPIs and milestones?
Yeah, what I've seen work best in this situation really is a combination of the CEO and the board working together to develop this. So you don't just want the CEO lowballing themselves and coming up with some really easy to do KPIs that may or may not even be related to the strategic ambitions of the organization. That's why you need the board to just really pressure test and make sure these are stretch goals, or that they're pushing appropriately the high performance in the organization. So it could be a combination of the CEO and board, but if you're a CEO and your board's not coming forth with that, I encourage you to at least start with some sort of KPIs that you give to the board and say, what do you think about these? The chances are is that the chair and the CEO spend much more time together, whether that's face-to-face or over the phone or over Zoom or whatever, than the CEO does with the rest of the board. And the chair really holds this kind of tough love, sort of mentoring, coaching type position. Of course, doing that through creating a relationship that is safe and that maintains the appropriate confidentiality, but also with the chair keeping the board in the loop. You don't want to feel as a board member that there's perhaps this kind of secret relationship happening where decisions may be being made between the chair and the CEO that should be made by the board as a whole, and keeping the board in the loop there. And vice versa, that the chair is actually communicating to the CEO really what the board wants it to, and that the chair's not then just going off on a frolic and being either more critical or harsh or having different expectations than what the rest of the board does. So really, again, come back to this role clarity. I'm really big on setting expectations and that everyone is clear on what's expected of them, what's expected of everyone else. And the chair is no different. And so you want to incorporate in your board, in your structure, really what is that role of the chair in general, but then what is the role of the chair in relation to this CEO? Because every CEO would need something different. They may meet on a different schedule or have different communication needs or just general business or coaching needs from that chair. And so really just evaluate that on an ongoing basis. It's not a set and forget sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. I think there's a few things we can throw in here. First of all, it doesn't have to be the chair that does this role. It usually is. If a particular board, it's more suitable for the deputy chair or another person to take that coaching role, and the chair looks after the board itself, that can happen. Similarly, when it comes to performance reviews of the chairs, I'm seeing more and more that there's actually 2 board members who handle that, because the chair having that regular sort of fortnightly or even occasionally weekly catch up has suddenly got pretty close to that CEO. So you need that extra person in the mix for the objectivity. And I do like to mention how vital it is that, and Lisa's already covered this slightly, but the confidentiality. Please don't have your chair CEO meetings in cafes. Just don't do it. It's inappropriate. Yes, there might be good coffee, but really you're going to get interrupted, the risk of being overheard. And most importantly, that is not a safe environment for either of you. If something goes wrong with an emotional discussion, it's just inappropriate. So please set it up in a safe and secure way.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw in a perspective, Lisa, and I'm interested in yours and Giselle's feedback on this, very CEO-centric. But as the CEO, I very much see the board as my boss collectively, the chair is the facilitator of is ideally the one that's best suited to mentor and coach me as the CEO. But really what I'm looking from in the chair is the ability to manage upwards well and to be able to deliver what the board needs. So that's the central, I see a few nods there, ladies.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a really straightforward way of saying it. Yeah, that's good.
Being able to deliver the hard messages on behalf of the board too. We have another question. When the working relationship between the CEO and the board chair is not working well, who can the CEO turn to? And I think that's a fantastic question. And the answer is the deputy chair, if there is one.
If there isn't one, Giselle, would you just...
Then another another board member. It depends on what the reason why it's not working well is. But for example, if you feel there's a different approach to risk or appetite for risk, if you like, you might go to the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. Whereas if it's a purely an HR issue, then maybe there's a people committee chair or someone who takes that role around the board table. So it depends is the answer.
We just had a comment from Helen Johnson. She's saying, depending on the makeup of the board, coaching can go both ways in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all got something to learn from everyone, I think. That's a good way to put it. Okay, moving on. So we've established who this CEO is, what their relationship is to the board. Now let's think about the board and really the main touch points that it has with the CEO and what this is. That CEO role, we are saying CEO is a shorthand. We've described all of the different permutations within that. Really, the board has a couple of key things that they do with this role. Importantly is your appointing of the right CEO, your CEO succession planning, and I guess if we want to generalize it, holding that CEO accountable, but also being supportive and really setting them up for success. And we do this through some various things that we'll touch on, but let's jump back to CEO succession planning. We have a poll question. Giselle, would you like to throw that one out?
I'll just release that for you.
Perfect. So we'd love to know from the attendees here today, do you have an emergency CEO succession plan? So let's think about 3 different types of succession planning or 3 different types of situations that you may find yourself in where you need to recruit a new CEO. One, of course, we've mentioned here, emergency succession planning. As you can imagine, the proverbial bus hits your CEO and they're not there all of a sudden, and we're in an emergency situation. What do? Do you have a plan? You've got planned succession, which is working with the CEO through to their retirement or leaving or end of contract or whatever what's coming. You know that the CEO will have to get refreshed, and you're usually working with that CEO on that process, working them out. And then, of course, you have the other one, which is a forced succession, where you need to fire them for whatever reason, or not renew their contract, or whatever language you choose to describe that as. So it's interesting. We've got some plans. Yes, would a point from the executive team, not really at 11%, and no at 34%. So what are we, like 45% of you don't really have a plan that you're confident in, certainly around emergency CEO succession. So really a nice thing to have as a board is a plan around your CEO succession, or what do you do when these moments come up, but not just when the moments come up, what do you do at all times? And there is a lot of information around this in the white paper, so I encourage you to do that if you're looking for that. But having a plan that breaks down a few things, what are the actions of the CEO and the board when it comes to CEO succession in general? What happens when the CEO gives notice? So this is around this planned succession. What do you do when maybe the CEO is not giving you notice, but you have an inkling that they may be on the way out the door? What do you do then? Then what do you do once you know they're walking out, either through planned or you've got that notice and it's all of a sudden? And then what do you do after they've left? So having all of this mapped out and taking action, so making the time on a regular basis. And I think with this rule of thumb, around 15% of your overall board meeting time, if you take sort of a year view, and then having time for a longer in-depth conversation around developing maybe this CEO succession plan as a board, that's a rule of thumb that you want to be considering and spending time on this.
Yeah. And I will just say there, Lisa, like, I'm sure most boards are not spending anywhere near that time, other than when it is essential. Once it's
Mhm.
essential, it becomes a huge piece of the board's work. I do just wanted to ask, is Richard has asked a question about the emergency succession plan. They only have it because the CEO themselves put it together, which is fantastic, good for them. Should the board and chair be doing this? Technically, yes, I would think that key person risk is one of your top strategic risks, and so it makes sense. And certainly I've been in businesses where we have lost a key member to illness or accident out of the blue, and everyone's very good at pulling together, but how much better is it to have a clear plan that everyone's aware of? It's just good risk management basics, I think, for the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's one of those tasks that just gets always pushed down to the bottom of the to-do list because we have to focus on more important things. But as you said, Giselle, key person risk, one of the key risks you have, you don't know what could happen and when. Having a plan is going to really save you in those moments where you initially find out that something's happened or happening with the CEO. And so you can have that freak out. You still know that you've got this plan that you can refer to and work on executing your plan. And really what we want to do at the end of the day is really focus on appointing the right CEO. And really, who or what? You really want to figure out what is the right CEO? What is a successful CEO in this company for the next 1, 3, 5, I don't know, however many years we're confident and comfortable looking out to. I feel like that always gets shorter and shorter. What does the business need right now? And having that live part of your succession planning, having that sort of description of what is the right CEO, what do we need from this role, so that you can use it. You can use it to find those people, you can use it to assess the people, you can use it with your recruiters to help find the right candidates, and whether they come from within the organization or external, again, that's a consideration to make as well, and possibly governed more so by really what you need from that role at that point in time, whether it makes sense internally.
I think it's a really interesting issue because so often boards are saying, we really want to work on our strategy. So we know what CEO we're looking for, but we need the CEO, the new one, to be part of the strategic conversation. It's become this very vicious circle because boards suddenly find that they're short on a clear strategy as they do the interview process.
Yeah.
We asked, what's your strategy? And we're like, we haven't revisited it for 3 years because we really want this person in the mix. So that can be quite challenging. And for some CEOs, they won't be interested if you haven't got a clear strategy. But if you do have one, you've excluded them. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's always, I remember a circumstance where I was close to the organization, but from the outside, is that at this point in time when they were bringing in a new CEO, they needed that CEO really to be that person that cleared the decks, cleared house, really made some substantial, significant change in the business, whilst also knowing at that time that they're not the one to then rebuild and take it there. They were the one to come in, turn over the decks, and then get out and make way for the new person to rebuild and all of that sort of stuff. And so these are the things you want to consider as well. Does it look or feel great to turn over a CEO twice in 2 years? No, but that might be necessary. It really does depend on what that organization needs at that time. So let's now consider, how do we support and get this balance of encouraging, supporting versus challenging and holding them accountable? And we do that through a few ways. It's having really clear delegations. So we have sent some things to the CEO so they can get that day-to-day job done. We've got these regular CEO and chair meetings and your updates via the CEO report. And I know that Board Pro has some great resources on that. So if you're feeling like your CEO reports really could do with some jazzing up, then check out those resources. And there's also a link to those in the white paper as well. And of course, your formal and informal performance reviews, making sure those are being done regularly, but also critically that you're taking action on the feedback that you're getting from those performance reviews, the data that you're receiving through your board reports and things like that. That's why it's so important that you're getting robust information that's helping you to make decisions. And taking action on those is critical. Don't let bad performance or underperformance linger on. No one likes that.
I would just suggest that the boards be very open to their own accountability as well by asking the CEO at the end of each meeting a question along the lines of, have you got what you need from us in this meeting? It's so important. Don't just assume because you've ticked the boxes on the agenda that the CEO has got what they need from the board to be accountable for that.
Yeah.
Giselle, have you ever seen a CEO prompt that question themselves? My observance, most boards consider the relationship, their job is to hold the CEO accountable. And I've not seen or heard of many boards go the other way and say, how are we helping you?
Yes, I think it's really important.
Such a great question. Such a great question. Thanks, Giselle. Sean, let's move on to the next juicy slide. Where can this relationship go wrong? If you've spent any time on a board, you're probably very well aware and familiar with how this can go wrong. But let's think of some of the key ones, certainly that I have seen in person or certainly heard about with the boards that I've worked with. Firstly, really it's very hard for a CEO to work with a board that has former CEOs, maybe even current CEOs around the board table that really can't take themselves out of that. I'm a CEO and this is how I do it, so why aren't you doing it like that? Or things like that. And I feel this issue is exacerbated if you have the former CEO of the same organization on that board for that new CEO.
Giselle, you're shaking your head furiously.
Yeah, it's just awful. Please don't do it.
Yeah.
It does happen in closely held shareholder businesses, but other than that, it's really unhelpful.
It makes the current CEO's job just that little bit more challenging. Of course, as we've talked about, this second point, a lack of understanding of the role of the CEO, role of the board, and the role of board members. Because if everyone's coming in with their own idea of what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, it's going to get really difficult. And especially for the CEO, if they're getting communications from every single board member about how they think they should do things, what they should be working on, what they need to be doing, it's going to get really complicated, complex, and frustrating for that CEO. And if you want a great CEO, they're not going to put up with that for very long. So I guess having clear channels of communication between the board member and CEO is good parameters to set. Of course, a CEO without any KPIs and or performance reviews, it's going to make that job more difficult for the board to really know what this CEO should be doing, how they're going to measure them when the time comes for their formal performance review, and really what is the information that you're getting? How do you know if they're doing a good job if you don't know what they're meant to be doing? You haven't defined what a good job is. It's going to be really hard for them. Also, I've experienced a few times now across various boards is burdensome contracts, really poorly written, set up, established contracts, however they came about, whether it's through not using an appropriate legal professional or industrial relations expert, or the board just gave up too much in their negotiations to get that great CEO. You're going to end up getting bitten in the future, potentially. Things like large payouts if they're leaving early or you decide to fire them for whatever reason. Things like large guaranteed annual salary increases, bonus structures, incentive schemes, whatever it is. Think about how that could impact the organization in the future if it actually came out that the contract ended in this way or went through this way. Of course, anyone who's been a CEO or been on boards would experience number 5 and 6. You've either got micromanaging board members, potentially even a chair, or you've got too little oversight with disengaged board members, two extremes of the same spectrum, both just as frustrating and annoying and bad for the CEO role from the board perspective, and no healthy engagement between the board chair and the CEO. Sort of wrapping up our list here. There are many more, no doubt.
Yeah, and I
Giselle?
will just chuck in something. So those of you who are in New Zealand may recall that in the last month or maybe 6 weeks, there's been a Law Society, New Zealand Law Society investigation and on the governance. And one of the recommendations that came out of it was that there be a job description for the president, who's the chair of that board. And I thought that was really interesting. We don't know the detail. I'd love to find out, but so far the report itself is not public. But the recommendations are public, and one of them is job description. And I think that's hinting at either 5, 6, or 7, or 3. I'm not sure. So
I'll chime in there as well, Lisa. From my years as a CEO, I think the top challenge I've seen is an individual board member, or say a couple of them, getting frustrated, thinking there's poor performance, and the board doesn't necessarily roll with them or agree with them or do anything about it. And the pressure builds, and then it can flip either way. And the CEO kind of sits in the middle going, my job is to listen to the board collectively, not the individual, but I'm feeling the pressure here. And I think that comes back to that number 7 is the CEO really ought to be saying to the chair, we can't just leave this lingering. That's your job.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see boards have much more process conversations about what's their pause, get away from the content and say, what's our job? How should we function in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely.
there's a really cool exercise I just on that, Brett, to do, which is actually going through the jobs and just whiteboarding them. Whose job is what? And it can be very neutral, light, but really powerful.
A bit of bravery involved, I think, Giselle, because almost every board member I've ever experienced has a fair helping of ego, and they don't want to, they naturally resist process conversations and how should I do my job. We've had some people that have had Queen's Service medals and top executives in major technology businesses, and they're all learners. It's lifelong learning is my observation.
Agreed.
That's definitely the mentality you need as a board member. So let's now look at where the relationship can go wrong from the CEO perspective. And these are a little chicken and egg, but let's think of this. As we've mentioned, unclear performance requirements or expectations, or if the CEO is not meeting them entirely, both are just as frustrating. And imagine, Brett, you as CEO, if you didn't know what great looked like, what do you do every day? How do you know, oh, I had a good day at work, or I feel like I'm accomplishing things, when you don't know what you need to accomplish?
Totally with you. Totally with you. And in fact, if you don't get it from the board, you should be defining it yourself and asking the board to endorse it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So also mixed messages or poor communication from board members, which we did talk about. If there's no structure, process, we did talk about process. As much as we think that board members should all just get together and know how to work as a team and know what they're doing, that's not the case. You need structure, you need process. One of those is around getting united as a board on the messages, on what we're going to communicate to the CEO and how that's going to get done, whether that's through the chair, what are the rules and parameters around communication to the CEO and to other staff members as well outside of board meetings. How is that going to flow? How does it work? You really need to be aware that every time you're asking something of the CEO as a board member, you're taking them away possibly from actually doing their day-to-day job and achieving what you want them to. So think of that every time. Thirdly, no disciplinary actions for underperformance or misbehavior. So how often do we hear about CEOs gone rogue and the board really not doing anything, or say that they're doing what they can and nothing's really happening, and then you end up with potential risks to organization reputation and just a whole raft of other issues that can come from letting a bad CEO continue what they're doing. Another thing that I'm always super paranoid, it's probably a good word to use, paranoid about, is around a CEO controlling and sanitizing information in whatever way, creating a false front or view of the organization to the board. I have heard in my jobs that the executive team get together to agree on what are we going to tell the board. And that necessarily isn't a bad thing, But when you know what they're doing is creating this picture of flowers and honey and Skittles and everything and rainbows, when you know that's not the facts, that just really raised my concern around this, probably why I now have this paranoia. So how do you deal with that, Giselle?
I'm a believer. I'm a believer in proper prior preparation by the executive team, but it's not for the purposes of a good news culture.
Yeah.
It's actually for the purposes of fronting the bad news in an appropriate, professional, supportive way. So no one is thrown under the bus and they act like a team. So I think it's a good thing. I know from a board member perspective, if everything in the board paper is nice and tidy, I get very suspicious.
Yeah.
If there is no bad news, I want to know why I'm not hearing about it, because I'm sure that it's there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Team, we have 5 minutes left to wrap up. So
we're going.
Shall we move on?
Trust but verify. Yes. And the fifth one, CEO dominating, tail wagging the dog. I've experienced. Do what you can to avoid that from happening. The board is in charge of and works with and through the CEO, not really the other way around. So find that appropriate balance. And we've mentioned no healthy engagement between the chair and the CEO. So really work on getting that dynamic thriving. Now, what do we do about either avoiding these issues happening or rescuing this relationship? How can we really optimize this board CEO relationship? Of course, have a robust and clear employment contract, preferably or separately, clear co-created strategy between the board and CEO, or board, CEO and senior management team, depending on how large your team is, with milestones and KPIs. Everyone knows what we're trying to do and what we're working towards and what it looks like when we're making positive progress towards that. Implement a robust process for CEO performance evaluation. And then just as importantly, how is that feedback being delivered to the CEO? As Giselle mentioned earlier, it's a good idea to have a couple board members involved with that. So the chair and deputy chair, the chair and another appropriate board member, or however works best for your context.
So we've got a question just quickly from Paul about how best to manage performance when the CEO or MD is also the sole shareholder. So it's a really unusual board arrangement that you would find yourselves in. So you've got effectively either a founder or a dominant or sole shareholder. Really challenging, and your own job's on the line all the time. But ultimately, that person's got a board for a reason, the board to be effective. So they need to take some of the tough times with the nice times. So it's not all about the honey.
Quick chime in there. We've got a great blog post we wrote about what happens when you have a gorilla on the board, and that fits this scenario. So go and type into gorilla into the Board Pro blog, and if you can't find it, ping me. I've got that actually from one of our shareholders. It served on the Financial Markets Authority board, so there was some nice wisdom in there.
Oh, how amazing. Awesome. So number 4, remunerate your CEO fairly and reasonably, and always given the context and the limitations of the organization's resources. And if you are extremely resource constrained, every organization has constraints to some degree, but find non-monetary ways that can enhance or increase that CEO's package, whether it's through something like an additional week of annual leave or something else that's of value to that person. That doesn't necessarily mean having to increase their salary and things like that if it's a strain on the organization. Invest in the CEO's growth and development in relevant areas. This may also include the CEO having a mentor outside of the board, which is a fantastic idea. Giselle, I think that was your idea. So thank you for adding that.
Not my idea at all. I'm just seeing it as an increasing trend and increasingly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So relevant areas. I've had an experience where CEO really put forward some obscure, vague, not necessary programs that they were interested in, and we said no, and it just didn't make sense for the CEO to be doing those things. So really relevant areas that make sense for the organization, for the person, for the strategy. Educate your board members on the role of the CEO, board CEO, and the CEO chair dynamic and relationship. And don't just do this once. Organizations are dynamic and they need different things at different times from each of these players in this game, from the CEO, from the board, from the chair. This is an ongoing thing, not just when people first join the board, about how and what everyone is doing and how we're doing it. And lastly, take swift action when things start to break down or become dysfunctional, or really just aren't operating normally or properly or optimally with the CEO. And I would hope the CEO would also do that back at the board. It is the purview of the chair, I would think, in general, but really with the board member support. Everyone needs to be investing into making the board and these dynamics optimal for the interest of the organization.
Well said, Lisa.
Thank you.
So thanks, everybody. That almost concludes our webinar today. Feel free to connect with our presenters today on screen here, both Brett, Lisa, and Giselle. I'm sure they will look forward to your connection.
Absolutely.
We have our last webinar in the governance series on December 8th, which is titled Setting the Strategic Board Agenda. Now, this is hosted by Stephen Bowman with Brett Herkt and Linda Carroll on our discussion panel. And this will be a really informative topic, so please take a moment to consider an investment of time for that. As part of this webinar, you'll receive a copy of our strategic agenda template, which is brand new, designed by Steve Bowman of Conscious Governance and Graham Narkis of BoardWorks, both of whom are really highly regarded international experts. From there, we'll take a little break over the summer period and we'll be back online for other Governance Made Easy webinars from the 8th of February. So as I mentioned in the opening, you'll receive an email from us very shortly, which will include a video of today's webinar, the presentation slides, the topic white paper from Lisa, and please feel free to share this information with your colleagues. We'll also post this collateral to our webinar page, boardpro.com/resource center over the next couple of days. Now, as you leave the webinar, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey and go into the draw for our hamper. We'll announce the winners shortly after the webinar today. So thanks everybody for your attendance today. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you, Brett, Giselle, and especially Lisa Cook. It was great to have you with us today. Thanks again, everybody, and we look forward to having you at our next webinar.